Welcome back to the iHeartRadio Moll Anderson Show. I am so excited to have on attorney and healthcare consultant Craig Garner. He wrote this fabulous book called Hospital Stay, a guide for patients and family members who find themselves in the confusing confines of a hospital environment. Hey, Craig, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I am really good, and I'm so excited to have you on because this is one of those situations where I found out firsthand, and we're talking about it today on the show, and I just love that you wrote a book about this because there's such a need for it out there.
Well, my experience is that tends to be the place where people get lost most often, and not the patients, but the people visiting the patients as well. And it's the last place anyone wants to be, and no one seemed to really know how to navigate through. And this book was designed for pretty much anybody in any hospital situation, giving them some basic information so it's not so scary.
Well, you know, going to the hospital is something people don't do every day, and yet there's people out there who are doing it every day because they have no choice. They've had a situation that's put their family into shock. What is the first thing someone can do to help?
Well, I think the first thing someone can do is be a good listener and kind of take a step back and realize that you're not the patient, if that's the case, if you're a friend or family, and respect the patient's boundaries, but be mindful that they're going to be scared, they're going to need help, and depending on the role that you may play, it's one of support both in the hospital and in that preparation for leaving the hospital.
Well, now many of us, we've got loved ones in the hospital and we can't wait to get them home. But once they're discharged, their endless, daunting task of taking care of them. I mean, where do we begin? How do we know if we can handle the responsibility and be the caretaker and accept the position? How do we know we're ready? Is there information? What do we do? Because it's scary.
It really is to make sure that where the patient goes is the appropriate place, and the doctor will be the one who should be making that decision or at least that recommendation. And sometimes there needs to be a step in between going home and leaving the hospital, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. But ultimately, if there's a long recovery time and it's going to be in someone's home, there's varying degrees. You might have in-home nursing care, which is, again, makes it a little easier for that transition, maybe for the first few days, but eventually there's a good chance you're going to be alone with the patient. And I'm not clinically trained, and most people who take care of family and loved ones, if it's their own family, they're not clinically trained either. And it starts from the first day the patient's at the hospital. It starts with understanding why they're there and the problem, and kind of working through the process, working through the hospital stay, so when it's time to leave, you're equipped with all the information as to what they've gone through and the healing process and what it entails. It's really not something that you can come in at the day of discharge, listen to someone explain, the instructions before you leave and know exactly what to do. It really starts upon admission, and that's where the learning begins. And after that, it's really, are you comfortable doing this? Because that's the other part. You don't want to take upon a role that you can't do and that you're not comfortable doing. Otherwise, you do yourself a disservice as well as the patient. But there's no instructions, there's no handbook per se. Every patient's different. People react differently. You have to know what the signs are of when things maybe take a turn for the worse, and maybe you need to go back to the doctor. But you also need to know when things are a normal course of healing, and not to panic, not to cause any undue delay. But if you're not clinically trained, you should never play doctor and simply help in the healing process. But if you are in doubt, that's when you have to call a medical professional.
If you're just joining me, I'm visiting with Craig Garner, and he's authored a book called Hospital Stay. Craig, tell me, let's talk about speaking to the doctors. I always feel like, and I know friends have said this, that they need a tape recorder before they start because they feel like, I'm thinking, what the heck did he just say? And if you're upset while speaking to a doctor, it can be very difficult to focus and pay attention. Can you give us some tips on how to listen better or how we should speak up if they're saying something that we just don't understand? Because a lot of times people don't want to sound stupid,
Sure, no, and I think that there's a big communication gap sometimes between patients and doctors, or family members and doctors, and I think that you can take extreme examples. If you want to think about TV and you have our movies, you've got the doctor scene in The Exorcist where they come to the daughter's room and They believe it's still something to do with their temporal lobe, all the way to Dr. Gregory House, who isn't really kind to patients. But I think you should be prepared for a meeting with a doctor, whether you're the patient or the family member. Make a list and kind of go through the things that come to your mind as you think about it, so you're prepared to address your questions as well as what the doctor wants to say. You should never let the doctor leave unless he or she has answered all of your questions. It's critical to not have any ambiguity and not be unclear about what's going on. Doctors tend to speak in a different language, and some have better bedside manners than others. The nursing staff is always very helpful to supplant information and to provide information in advance. I mean, the nurses are the ones who are there around the clock. The doctors may stop in a couple times a day, depending on what's going on. They obviously are the ones to whom we look for guidance, but ultimately you look at the team at the hospital as your team. Nurses, physicians, other medical professionals, they're the ones who are really giving you the full gamut, not inconsistent information, but just the full picture. And the one thing I always recommend against is going online and trying to figure things out for yourself.
I was just going to ask you about that, because don't you think we Google everything to death now, and that we get too much information to the point where we can be dangerous?
I think we're all guilty of it, but we self-diagnose and we think we can figure it out through WebMD or otherwise. Now, these are great resources, but there is something to be said about medical school, residency, training, and experience, and that should not be discounted. I think that the communication between physician and patient has evolved over the years, and it has eroded recently because of the Internet and the information we can access there. But I think at the end of the day, it's about balance. You can get some information. You can ask questions. Nothing's wrong with asking some crazy theory you might have because you saw it on the Internet, but don't base your actions on that alone. Always speak to your doctor.
Well, we're talking Hospital Stay, Healthcare Made Easy, a book that was authored by Craig Garner. Craig, I mean, this is an emotional process and stressful. I mean, so stressful on the givers who are taking care of everybody. How important is it to take care of yourself while you're taking care of another?
Oh, it's critical, because if you get sick or are unable to take care of that person, there's not much use. And especially if the patient who is healing might need to be in an environment where you don't have a cold or you don't have some kind of other issue that could cause infection, and it is very draining, because the focus will be on the patient, not on the individual caregiver, but both have to stay strong and healthy, and it's something you really shouldn't plan to do alone. You should definitely have backup, have some help, make sure you get plenty of rest, you eat healthy, and that you take time, even if it's take a break, go somewhere, provided obviously if there's a need to monitor your friend or loved one, that at least someone's there at all times, but you have to stay strong during that process.
Can you tell me why you wrote this book? I mean, I'm so glad you did, first of all, because you're talking to someone who's been through it firsthand. But what possessed you to write about this?
I've worked in a hospital for 9 years, and as the CEO of the hospital, I saw everyone come in from all different parts of LA County and elsewhere, and I came to learn, or at least I believed, that it really did not matter what your background was. You would get lost, and you would not know the process, and it leveled the playing field for everybody. And I saw the same common issues come up time and time again. People didn't understand why they kept drawing blood, why they kept doing this test, who that person was, who this person was who came in, and it's very confusing. They're sterile environments. They're a little, you're not home. Nobody wants to be at a hospital. They just are. Whether it's an emergency or an elective procedure, it's never fun. The goal is to get out as quickly as possible, not too soon, not too late. And it just seemed like people had to have basic information, like a blood test. Why are they drawing this blood? What are they doing with it? What's the point of all this? To, unfortunately, the very end, what happens when people are discharged? What happens when people pass? I mean, it's just, the hospital it's got everything. It's wonderful. It's got life. It's tragic. It's got death. But it's its own animal. It's 24 hours a day. It never closes. and that's what we want. We want it to stay open.
Well, I think this would be a great start by buying your book for someone who is about to go into a situation like that, whether it's elective or it's a shock or something that we unexpected. Can you tell us, Craig, how we can find this book?
The book is available on Amazon as well as in some bookstores, but I know it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and most of the online retailers.
Well, I'm so glad you wrote the book, and I'm so glad you took the time to visit with us today because I think it's so important. And caregiving is so underrated. People do not understand how people need information and how to be helpful. And thank you so much for writing it, especially from someone who's been through it and wish they had had this book to read in the first place.
Thank you, and thank you for your time as well.
Well, thank you, Craig. Please come back when you write that next one.
Fair enough. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Of a white